Okay, Raj, go ahead.
Oh, so you can hear me now,
Yeah,
Sister Judy? Oh,
yeah.
perfect. Oh, you guys did fix it. No, I was just gonna say that when you said back to basics, it means we tend to forget the basics. We kind of, miss that basic part or foundational part and kind of tend to pay more attention to the superficial things instead of the important things, which is, or in this case, we could say that, we are souls or we are human beings first and then everything else, but we tend to miss
Mm,
that part and go with, I'm a female, I'm black, I'm white, I have this title and all that kind of superficial stuff.
right, right. Very good. Thank you. Nora, were you going to share something?
Ah, I think it's okay.
No, go ahead. I don't know. Everything's good.
Shanti,
You're on mute, though.
I'm on mute?
Yeah.
No, because I'm using the
Oh, okay.
systems.
Oh, okay.
Um, I guess I was really thinking about a lot of simplification, and perhaps maybe the part of the simplification is because of at that time of going back to basics. Usually, someone goes back to the basics um, if they suddenly find that nothing's working, and
So it's a humbling moment.
yeah, and that's why I was about to use the word humbling, but this morning when we're talking about humble, it's related to self-respect.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're at that, usually when those times come on, you don't feel humbled. You just it just feel like as if your ego is bruised.
Mm.
So, but it must be, maybe a deeper sense of self-respect you can't access at that moment, if that makes sense. But simplification was a big one. I think that you're just not interested, I suppose, in a lot of the fancy things, and you're just
So
maybe
Raj used the
tired.
word superficial.
Mhm. I think that's all I thought about before our interesting
Our interlude.
situation here.
Mm. Jima, thank you, Nora. Jima, did you want to share anything? Okay. All right. No problem. So it's interesting when you shared, Nora, about humbling versus ego bruise. So something happens. We're rolling along. Things are going along. Feel we are progressing. For whatever reason, we've got certain ideas in our head of what progress will look like. And then we feel that we hit an obstacle, challenge, or something that knocks us back. And we say our ego is bruised. And humbling is based on self respect, if you will. And it's interesting because at that moment, it's like you're at a fork in the road. What you're going to do with being knocked back, if there is self respect, yes, it will be humbling, but if there is self respect, I will use that situation as a helpful indicator. I need to check my basics. But if there isn't self respect, I'll just get stuck, right? I'll just get stuck and I'll start to generate crazy thoughts in my head that are generally directed outwards as this was wrong, that person, that's why. It's not my fault, right? So I'll miss that opportunity because there isn't self respect. I won't use it as an opportunity to recheck. So humbling again means, okay, I'm using it to recheck. There's that self respect. And I know that in physical fitness, again, we tend to borrow these terms from the physical fitness world, back to basics, is one. I've always really, really enjoyed a lot this idea of how much time I spend on the basics. And I've noticed that the most elite athletes have a lot of appreciation and almost a real regard for basics. And, you know, coming to my mind is the image of the ballerina, the prima ballerina of the ballet company. And they're in their ballet class and doing the basic exercises and doing, you know, taking so much care. It's the same exercises they've been doing since they were 5 years old. Pliés, tendus, etc. Same exercises, not bored, not tired, not careless, very attentive, always trying to refine. And so someone looking is like, they must not be very advanced. They're just doing basic exercises, and yet you can see the amount of care, how much regard they have for the value of those basic exercises. For me, working with, you know, being around a lot of fitness goers, athletes, the ones that are really progressing on a deep level and have longevity, it's far-sighted. It's sustainable. Sustainability are the ones who give that regard to basics, that keep going back, checking in on the basic movements. I was laughing because I don't know if it was or someone else. No, I was talking to someone else. And we were talking about this movement now in the fitness industry, and I think many other industries. It happens definitely in religious paths as well, where they want to reconnect with the roots of that path, the genesis. But in fitness, there is a movement that really looks at we call it physical literacy, but the very basics of movement. So it's called natural movement. So think about when you're a little toddler and you're crawling around. That level of movement. Really, just, you know, as children, we swing, we leap, we pull, we run. Very basic building blocks of movement, physical literacy, and really dedicating themselves to reminding the body of those movement patterns. So back to basics is a lot about reminding it was there. And then, yeah, I got caught up in other things and perhaps the superficial. That's a beautiful word because it's actually an anatomical word in physical fitness. Superficial is on the surface and deep is more invisible. And so the superficial and deep both have value. When we are very young, we intuitively, the body, we just are using everything in a proper way, and we do recruit a lot of the deep. But then as we go along, we start to get more interested in the superficial. And we think this is progress if the superficial is improving. So do I have a six-pack? Do I have big biceps? All of these kinds of things. And I think this is progress. And meanwhile, so I'm taking some sort of attainment from that feedback. But meanwhile, the deep might be neglected or forgotten. And so, yes, an injury might happen. I do know of athletes, very extreme athletes, who become injured. And what does their recovery look like? Back to basics. The idea that I need to, somewhere the basics were neglected or forgotten, and eventually it led to some difficulty. So there has to be a lot of love for basics. And in spirituality, in a spiritual study, it's a very interesting journey. It's not really linear. This has always been our concept of progress in science, and superficial is this sort of linear model. But it doesn't work that way. In spirituality, it's cyclical. So we start with an idea, and then we go on an interesting journey, and we come back to the same idea, but in a different place, a deeper place. And then we go again and come back in a deeper place. So it's about reminding ourselves, but also deepening, taking care of that basic. So yes, the basic in spirituality is I am a soul. So that's the first thing, the first lesson we get. And we say it's the most difficult lesson in the study. It's like a riddle that's eluded, great philosophers and thinkers in terms of experiencing it, genuinely experiencing it. So we get I'm a soul. We feel there's value. So we go on a journey exploring it. And then we come back and we say, oh, wait a minute, I get it now. I'm a soul. I didn't get it before, but now I really get it. And then I go on the journey and work with it a little more. And then, oh, wait, no, I thought I had it before, but I didn't. Now I've really got it. I'm a soul. You can see it's quite interesting. It's cyclical. So there is progress, there is depth, but I'm kind of working with this basic idea. And there's really just 3 basic ideas that we work with. And we just keep circling deeper and deeper into them. And that's progress. It may not look like much is going on, but there is so much going on the deep level, which is so useful. If we get caught up in the superficial, that we just start to talk in this linear model, just talk a lot about soul or talk a lot about God, but we're not going deeper. We're just kind of going on a tangent. I can be deceived, and many people will probably give me positive feedback that, wow, you talk so well about soul and supreme soul, but it's up to me to know, yes, maybe good talk, but how is the walk? How is the walk? Am I really, really mastering this idea of being a soul? Have I really mastered it? So I want to think of not going into breath, but really going deep. And this morning we had a very nice talk with one of the senior students. He was sharing on the stage of being so light. And I really enjoyed listening to him because, it just sounded like he wasn't really saying anything deep it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful, but it wasn't like, deep, esoteric kind of stuff that we can often get into. It's just, just enjoy your time in silence and that beautiful experience of being with God. And that was pretty much it. And don't think too much about what's going on. And that was it. But what I felt was this soul is in such a spiritually evolved place, even though it wasn't a lot of gymnastics with words. Wow, they have mastered the basics. So when we say back to basics spiritually, not going backwards, but really, have I mastered the basics? And keep circling back, hopefully in a new place every time. So it's like an upward spiral. Keep circling back. I'm a soul. That is advancing, not doing a lot of stuff or making a lot of stuff or being everywhere. It's just, am I mastering those 3 basic things that are central to spirituality? Who I am, I'm a soul. Who I belong to, I am a child of the Supreme Soul. And what does that mean? And what do I need to do? What's going on? Do I really know what's going on in the world drama? Am I caught up in byplots? Do I really get where things are going? Because that's going to tell me what I should be doing with my time. So have I really mastered these 3 basic things? And there's a saying that you could, turn the ocean into ink and the land into paper and the trees into quills, and you still would not reach the end of spiritual wisdom. And it's not that it means there's a lot of stuff, a lot of information. It just means that to go deeply into very, very few simple, just 3 things, to go deeply into it and to really understand it and live there, it just, there's no end to how deep. It's like an ocean that has no bottom, right? You just keep trying to go deeper and deeper into the truth without going ego, intellectual, superficial will try and pull us wide, spread us thin. But I want to stay focused and keep going deeply into these basic things. And I think the main thing I've noticed for myself, I noticed it physically, it's lucky is the soul that genuinely enjoys for its own intrinsic reward, enjoys doing the basics. That doesn't, sometimes people say, I'm bored, it's dry, I need something else. Lucky is the soul that doesn't get bored doing the basics. That it's very, I love the word that was used this morning when the soul was talking about silence. It's a very creative silence. It's not a dead silence, it's a creative silence. I'm there in that beautiful experience with God, experiencing so much. Right? It's a very simple, basic state, but never getting, constantly discovering, never getting bored, just wanting to refine, refine, refine. That is one lucky soul. And again, there'll be that longevity, that sustainability, and less dependence on facilities and outcomes. Someone who loves the basics is not dependent on facilities and outcomes. So the feeling that I want this to happen as feedback, that I'm moving ahead, I want this to happen, very quantity focused, or I need things to be a certain way or I can't have the experience. So we keep trying to refine the facilities rather than our own faculties. So really have to have such a love with going deeper, being, some call it being a technician, but just, I don't want to make it sound technical, but really exploring that simplicity. I know that word was used, the simpleness of those basics, but how beneficial, how much attainment there is. I don't know if there's any greater reward, any greater experience than that of getting that I am a soul. We hear the words, but to really go there is absolute freedom, complete freedom. Nothing will disturb you because we are eternal, imperishable, and everything that I'm actually seeking is within the self. So it's to really go deeply into that state is freedom. And then, of course, to remove anything of the past that's pulling me out of that state, which is the point of God, how God helps us, yoga. That's getting close to perfection or completeness, contentment. And then such a soul, of course, is a benefactor, working in such a beautiful way with the law of karma. So really, to really recognize the value of the basics. I see, you see this with athletes, it's that theme. They recognize the value of the basics. They have a great regard. Similarly, in spirituality, I recognize the value of the basics and never become tired. So I'm going to stop there and check in if any thoughts are bursting in your minds that you want to share.
Om Shanti. I had a question, but it was
Let's ask these souls. They look smart.
there's a backstory to it. I shared it this morning, but it was about back to basics, the real thing. But the contrast between, I know for souls, some of the souls, Sister Raj may have taken that pure versus positive, that pure thinking course. But I guess given this morning's class, and I was thinking about that example about back to basics and to be able to have the capacity to feel if the feedback internally is real or not. And the example I was giving was, I work with many different medical teams, and these different teams have each one is assigned a psychologist. There was a patient who was assigned to a different psychologist, and she thought she was supposed to be the one assigned, and she was quite upset about it.
Mhm.
And then so she was going on and on. And when she asked, why am I not the one who's being assigned? It's like, actually, because this patient's been transitioned to a different department. So they knew ahead of time. So that's why she's assigned. The moment she said, oh, okay, like no more.
Mhm.
I'm only assuming there was no more thoughts.
Mhm.
But that degree of just reality, I suppose you can say.
Mhm.
But then I was thinking about if she was never given that piece of information, and you're like,
Mhm.
okay, you just try to convince them, well, that person's really nice, that
Mhm.
person's really nice, everyone's cooperative, trying to find ways to try to stop the waste going on.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you might perhaps maybe get some feedback internally, like some sort of, thinking that you're moving forward, but you kind of still
Mhm.
sort of miss the point,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. The idea that I'm only okay if I get the information. Was I okay before I got the information is more of a sign that something's happening inside versus I'm still dependent on things outside in some way making me feel okay. And yeah, it's really interesting um, how we see in physicality that sometimes as we're going through the physio, we need some supports to progress us to a certain point. And so we have spiritual knowledge, which, the idea that everyone's a soul and they're all playing their part and they have a story. And we use that information to kind of help us not, go into a lot of, as we say, waste thinking. But I personally think the end game is that you actually don't even need the knowledge. You don't even need that information. You've arrived at such a state of soul consciousness, such a state of contentment that I don't need to know the story to be free of waste about what someone else is doing. I just am not capable of having waste thoughts. It's just not in my makeup anymore because I've arrived into such a state of soul consciousness.
Sorry, maybe that was where I need to clarify, was the contrast between the two
Mm-hmm.
was that she got, in that context, a piece of information where she could just let go versus just try to, everyone's trying their best, blah, blah, blah. But in the sense that if I really got soul consciousness, would I need all this other
Yeah,
stuff?
exactly. So we have that support of the other stuff.
Yeah.
So at least we don't come into strange karma. But our end destination, really penetrating the basics of soul consciousness, is I don't even need the other stuff. I just am not capable of having those kinds of thoughts or feelings anymore. Reactivity. It's supporting me while I get there. Yeah. We often joke, that we'll use the knowledge to think our way into a certain feeling, and that's okay because then, at least I'm kind of saving myself from reacting. That's okay. But to imagine a scenario, it said that the deities do not have any name or trace of negativity, or that they are fools, we call them fools to negativity. They are incapable of negativity. They can't even create the thought. So there's nothing to have to neutralize because they can't even react. Like they don't do that. They just have benevolent feelings, good wishes, pure feelings for everything. That's all that they are capable of. And, it reminds me a bit of, so that this back to basics turns into a bit of an unlearning, very odd education, a reductive process. We're trying to unlearn things that we sort of took on as we forgot ourselves. We had to learn to be angry and learn to be impatient. It's a very strange situation. But when we forget ourselves, we start to learn or acquire, as we say, acquire these other traits. And this story, and you see it, I'm sure we've all seen it, where, a toddler's going along, running, whoa, and they fall. And that's a pretty critical moment. When am I going to teach them at that moment? And I've seen parents do different things. Some go, oh my goodness, that just hurt. And of course, they burst into tears. They start wailing because they're taking the cue. And other parents just ignore them. You know, and they just get up and start flopping around again. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting what we have by forgetting ourselves, what we've learned, if you will. So now back to basics will include unlearning to the point that I will not be capable of having those kinds of reactions anymore. So I have some supports along the way. We call it spiritual knowledge, but that very basic state, which we call a pure state, is we literally, I mean, it's a very beautiful to think of where you just are not capable of reacting in a certain, you only have good feelings. You just, someone will say, aren't you angry? You'll go, no, why would I be angry? Like it literally befuddles you. You just can't, that's the basic state. So we're trying to return to that. And the method is through soul consciousness and God consciousness. Soul consciousness tells me who I am. God consciousness removes what I am not. So it's a very important double-pronged approach to getting me back to that basic state, that pure state. So I have to have a deep love for those basics, deep love. Otherwise, the ego, if you will, or whatever you want to call it, body consciousness, whatever desires, they'll keep distracting me and pulling me into expansion. And I do think of basics as essence as well. It's very essence-full. Physically, when you're watching someone work with basics, it's very simple, essence-full exercises. We call it, the first level of progression. So they take it to a very simple, basic level, and yet getting so much power. I know for me, I've observed that doing, different modalities of movement, and yes, we can say for osteoporosis, osteopenia, yes, I will lift weights, whatever, but I haven't found that's actually what makes me stronger necessarily. It's actually refining basic exercises make me stronger, make the body stronger. So it's a certain understanding. What are the really strong, we have so many lessons in this university about, I've always enjoyed this phrase, even good children do not have yoga. And it's such an interesting phrase. What are we saying is a good child? It's back a bit to that word superficial Raj used, that on the surface it looks like they're spiritually successful. There's a lot of quantity, they have many students, they give good lectures. On a quantity level or superficial level, there's a lot going on. But then you remember the main thing about this study, the basic thing about this study, which is to remember the Supreme Soul such that I am restored to my original state. That's the whole point, the entire point of Raj Yoga. Nothing to do with how many students there are, how many lectures I give. That might happen if I'm doing the basic work. That might be a byproduct, but that is not the goal itself. The goal is to remember the Supreme Soul as much as possible, such that I am transformed or restored to my original healthy state. That is the objective. Other things might happen along the way. That's great, but that's not the objective per se. Those are signs and signals maybe, but the objective, so we have to check. Am I focusing on that? Am I focusing on that basic thing of experiencing myself to be a soul and being able to connect properly to the Supreme Soul? Is that basic thing happening? And it's very simple, essential. It's not showy. It's actually quite incognito. When souls sit physically seated meditation, you actually have no idea what anyone's doing. They can look on this outside like they're super yogi, right? Back straight, eyes, ooh, really drilling you with that drishti. I mean, they can look like something's going on. I don't know. I really, I'm not sure. We don't know. I mean, it's not a show. It's completely invisible. There will, of course, always be signs, but the actual act is quite invisible. And that's the interesting thing about the basics in a spiritual practice. They're all invisible, completely incognito. So keep coming back to the word superficial values. There is no show for the basics in this study. It's the foundation, so we will layer things on top of it, right? So my quality of my actions will change, etc. There's things that will be revealed if I'm mastering the basics, but the basics themselves are completely invisible. And that too often happens with physical. We find that we're trying to activate deep muscles that are very, very subtle. There really is no show about them, very, very subtle. I am reminded again and again of watching this crazy video with Misty Copeland, who is, American Ballet Theater's principal ballerina. And this crazy video she put online, I'm not sure what, anyways, it's very inspiring. But she's with a ballet master that she works with. And you go into a meditative state watching this video because you're focusing so hard on trying to perceive what they're trying to demonstrate. And she's doing a very basic exercise, which is called a tandu. It's just extending one leg to the side and pointing it while the other remains straight and stable. And he is so subtle. It's a very, very basic. I'm sure some people watching it will be like, why is Misty Copeland even have a video on this? It's doesn't even make sense. But I thoroughly enjoy it, and it's very humbling to watch. You can see the humility of that soul. It's just like he's going into such subtle mechanics, and you can tell she's about to activate the move. Like she literally just a millimeter, and he says, "Stop! Don't even bother. Don't even bother carrying on. You've already off." And you're like, you have to be so quiet to see what he's seeing. So quiet. He's going so deeply into the basics of the mechanics, so deep. And he keeps checking, do you feel it? He keeps asking her, do you feel it? Do you feel it? Do you feel that this isn't going to work out well if you continue? Can you feel that? Now, if someone's watching superficially, she has gorgeous execution of any exercise she does. Absolutely beautiful. So if someone's watching, they're like, her tandu is like one of the best in the world. Like, what is he talking about? But if we're talking basics, which she was willing to look at, she could easily do a gazillion beautiful looking tandus. But at the most deep basic level, that's what she wanted. She wanted to improve. She had a love to master that. And she also has a personal stake. If you ever look at her, she has extreme hyperextension. And I think she knows that she will be injured if she doesn't learn how to take care of that. So, she just has a deep love and personal interest to get the mechanics at the invisible level. No show, at the invisible level. Do I have that love that I'm letting go of the show and the outcome? And it's completely a natural thing. It's not a sense of denial, because I love so much just going deeply into the quality of the basics, mastering the basics. I am a soul. I am a child of the Supreme Soul. And karma, sorting out karma is everything. Just have I recognized that these are really the most beautiful things one can do with their life, these basic things. And if I do master them, I will get everything else anyways. Right? But I'll be so content it won't matter. So this is really a love affair. So it doesn't back to basics. It's like forward through basics is really what it feels like. And Jima has appeared. She is materialized. She is revealed. So before we finish, is there any last thoughts anyone wants to share? Okay. Yes, if anyone has anything they want to share, now is your chance.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to say to bring up this topic. It's very important, to always go back to basic and to check my alignment in everything that I do. Am I keep checking, like, am I going into the direction that ego is pulling me, or and to be able to check that, I always need to come back. I feel that when I'm able to stabilize at that moment, that I don't need to be pulled by ego, and I just want to be that my true self. At that moment, the feeling I have is a very sense of, I think, um, humility, and then a great sense of self-respect, that I don't need anything kind of feeling. So I think it's very good to have that more and more, going back to that alignment, and not needing anything to, as you mentioned as well, that when I am into my true self, at a time, I don't think I need anything which is the externally motivated, that I need attention, I need this, I need that. All these are very, very like egocentric, and which is pulled by external things. So it takes a lot of, I think, attention towards myself, that am I going back again and again. So it's a very, very important thing for myself in everyday life, to keep checking that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jima. Anyone else want to share?
I wasn't sure if, Judy, you remember, I don't know if it was the last interview session or if it was the one on Tuesday. I don't remember if you remember something that we were talking about, a certain dialogue that we have internally to move into that space of soul consciousness. And I think I was sharing something about, um, do I really buy into that dialogue? And there was something that you said that if I haven't really, I wouldn't really be feeling anything. And I guess it was back to this whole back to basics. I guess just what your last thing that you were sharing, to be able to discern what is the quality of that experience, because you can talk yourself into lots of experiences, to really experience what it means to be a soul. I know that, in one of the morning classes, you can have a vision of the soul. It doesn't really do anything, but it's a matter of understanding. And I think that's what I was talking about that session. There seems to be a very big difference. You can create an experience versus like exactly what understanding is that launches something so completely different. So when you were sharing, I was just thinking about the difference between these two, the quality of that experience. Can I, maybe it's a self-respect piece, to be able to know what's real and what's not, because it seems like there's an eye of a needle, and there's a lot of other stuff we've been doing that is not going through that needle.
Yeah, so what we've discovered, and it's a beautiful part of life, the variety of souls on the planet. There's a variety. And what we've discovered is that each soul has a different sensitivity. Some call it a different standard, but really it's just a different sensitivity. So, and I've always found this really interesting. Like we just had we are still having a recent experience that I've been very aware of. Um, you know, some are aware of Tanya, who is my physical sister. And I knew from very young that she had, I mean, when you're doing an all-nighter in grade 6, right? You kind of know this soul has a certain standard that's quite high. Grade 6ers should not be staying up all night to finish an assignment. And we were involved in a project now where I'm seeing that again. And I know, I know it because I've seen it all her life, that that soul has a sensitivity to a certain standard. And so, like if you're preparing, we have something called Toli that we give at the end of the program, sweets. I think everyone's familiar with that sweet. And I think I'm one of the few because, I've been around that soul enough to kind of play around, but it makes other souls nervous. They actually won't do it with her. And she said, "You're coming down to do the Toli with me." I'm like, okay. And I'm getting prepared because I know exactly what's going to happen. It's not going to be good enough. She will get out a ruler because every piece, and it's not because she's neurotic, she understands. It's a spiritual principle. Every soul should be treated equally. How does that look? Every soul should get the same size of Toli. So she will get out a ruler, and she is so particular. And I know that others are nervous, and I don't mind because I just joke around with her. And the way I do it, what it looks like at the end, it's fantastic, is you sort of say, Tanya, you do this so much better. I think you're going to have to do it. But I can see from the way things are going, there's going to be little bits that fall off that I can eat those. So what this looks like at the end is Tanya's doing it all and I'm eating the little pieces of Toli. It's fantastic for Judy. But she's just so, and I really love that. I appreciate that. And I'm very aware everyone's got a different sensitivity. So what you're talking about is what will make me content when I'm very honest with myself. What is someone else might say that looks great, carry on. But it's my personal sense of mastering that basic, not whether I've impressed somebody else. I can fool somebody else, but I still in my heart know there is more potential here to develop. And the soul really won't be content actually until it fully realizes its own potential, which is setting that sensitivity or that standard. So we saw this again this week, and she's going crazy making all these schedules. And I'm watching it knowing exactly what will happen. But I also know that that soul has that standard, and she will not be able to rest until she fulfills that standard. And although it might drive her crazy, it also keeps her close to the basics, right? Like, have I really mastered? And so it depends what your standard, your sensitivity is. It's not about saying better or worse. It's about recognizing there is variety. And that's a beautiful thing. That's what makes this whole global family work, right? If we're all the same, what's the point, right? So, but this interaction in the variety is amazing. But when it comes to dealing with the self, I need to be very honest, aware of if I don't meet that standard, I will, there'll be this little pinch inside. I was joking with Nora that working on a project this week, it's like, how many times I've had the Pink Panther experience. I think we all know the Pink Panther story where, grade 8 science competition, you have to come up with a poster for recycling. I don't know what the Pink Panther came into my mind for, but anyway, so on my poster, I bought pink poster board. And I like to draw. So there's Inspector Clouseau and the Pink Panther. And I remember there was a moment in my mind, it's like, okay, I think it's right. A moment in my mind where my mind said, yeah, but you haven't colored the Pink Panther in. You've just outlined it. It'll be better. But I was so tired at that point. I had other homework to do. It's like, no, it'll be fine. It's on pink poster board. It'll be fine. And sure enough, The judges came back and they said, Judy, you would have gotten first place if you had colored in the Pink Panther. That has stayed with me all my life because I knew, and I didn't. It was like immediate feedback from the drama, which was both entertaining and somewhat demoralizing. So I've had many Pink Panther experiences. There was one point where we were going to have to do blessings for like 11 different languages, some of which are so complicated, it's going to take multiple steps to make this happen. And I remember there was a point where I was like, you know what? It's not even really my zone. They can take care of it themselves. But inside, the little voice was saying, that's not really you. So it's connecting back to the basic. This is called soul consciousness, the sensitivity to the true self. And it was saying, you know, it's not really you. And it was like, I tried to ignore the voice, but I could not. And sure enough, I found myself. And this happened repeatedly over and over. And it was quite interesting to watch. A part of me was watching, okay, that's good enough. I've got to move on to something else now. It's like, yeah, but it's not good enough. And I'm not talking about being hard on the self or pushing the self. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the sensitivity to the self, that basic soul consciousness. And they used to say that Brahma Baba and the original students had very high standards. You know, and I remember Daddy Janki in London. You know, she's not really speaking much English. There's different custom systems, but it's amazing how God would use her and her sensitivity. And there's a couple of stories that really stand out. One was when our national coordinator, Brother Eric, went to visit, and Global Cooperation House, the big, big central international office in London, had just opened. And he went to visit, and it's beautiful, and Daddy's super spiritual. And she says to Eric, Eric, can you go into the men's washroom? Check the fixtures in the men's washroom. Make sure that, tell me what you think about them. And Eric's looking at, really? The fixtures? I mean, you'd think that was superficial. You know, he goes in and they're very royal and simple, very royal and simple, very beautiful. And Daddy wanted every inch of Global Cooperation House to give souls a spiritual experience of the divine, royal and simple. And she can't go into the men's washroom. But the story that came to me, and it happened when a lot of times when Daddy was very involved in checking projects and things. I remember once working on a project and they just said, just put some history photos in there, you know, from the early years of the, just put them in. And so I did and spent, you know, and sent it for checking. And they came back and said, Daddy says to remove this photo, change this photo, you know, or if it was a pamphlet, even though it's in English, Daddy says, change the sentence. Like her attention, her standard. So Brahma Baba was the same, some said very high standards, but it wasn't. It was soul consciousness. When they're in their true self, true state, their sensitivities. There's stories, you know, about the deities that, you know, that they, you know, when you make them a meal, the food has to be cut, you know, in just a perfect shape and size, or they just won't eat it. The sensitivity of the soul. So it's not about being crazy or obsessive. It's about being soul conscious and that very basic practice and how it will set the standards. So if you know, it's like I need to have an authentic experience. I can't just imagine one. That will not make me happy. It might make other people happy. It might make ego happy, but it won't make me happy. Right? And even if it looks like I'm not moving forward, it doesn't matter. The only way I will feel like I'm moving forward is if I have an authentic experience. Even if everyone else is running way over there and I look like I'm way back here, it doesn't matter. My heart won't be happy until I have an authentic experience. I did not come into this study to fake it or to prove something, right? Or to give a show. I did that out there. I came here to be honest and authentic, right? So it depends on one's sensitivities, what will satisfy them, and that's beautiful. That creates variety. So I was going to show you all. I'm going to stop recording actually. Oh no, first we'll have a meditation, a little reflection, and then I'm going to screen share. Is that okay? And if you have to go, it's fine. So, because I know it's late, so just a moment of reflection. I can feel that very often, especially when my physical senses, the eyes, the ears, the mouth are being used, my energy is dispersed out there in the physical world. But when I sit quietly, it's as if I'm drawing all of that energy back inside, like a tortoise withdrawing. My eyes and ears, senses are all still open and functioning, but my attention is drawing inwards to a single point until all the attention is on the self, behind the forehead. I, the living being, the force of life, the thinker, the observer, the one that expresses and experiences. I, the soul, separate from the body. It requires all of my attention to have this authentic experience of myself, completely free, aware that the body eventually will perish, but I am eternal. And my greatest speciality is to let go, be light. And so we say, I am a soul, a point of light. Om Shanti.